The storm came from nowhere, as storms often did on the high plains of Wyoming Territory. One moment, the late afternoon sky had been a washed-out blue. The next it was choked with angry purple clouds rolling in from the west. Lightning cracked against distant ridgelines as the wind picked up, bending the sparse grasses and sending tumbleweeds cartwheeling across the barren landscape. Daniel Blackwood pulled his collar higher against the first stinging drops of rain and squinted through the gathering gloom. His horse, a sturdy dun gelding that had carried him across 3 territories, nickered nervously at a crash of thunder. Blackwood patted the animal's neck with a weathered hand. "Easy chance," he murmured. "We'll find shelter soon enough." He was a man of middle years, his face lined and leathered by decades of hard living. A graying beard concealed much of his expression, but his eyes remained sharp beneath the brim of his mud-spattered hat, alert, observant eyes that had seen more than most. His clothing was unremarkable: a worn canvas duster over simple trail clothes, dusty boots with one spur slightly bent. Nothing about him suggested anything other than what he appeared to be: another aging drifter, another man without roots moving through the vast emptiness of the frontier. The rain began to fall in earnest now, and Blackwood hunched his shoulders against it. His bones ached with the damp, old injuries making themselves known as they always did before a heavy storm. 4 days on the trail from Cheyenne had left him bone-weary, and the prospect of spending a night huddled beneath his slicker with only hard-tack for company held little appeal. It was then that he saw it, a faint glow of lamplight through the curtain of rain, perhaps half a mile ahead where the trail curved around a low hill. Blackwood felt a flicker of relief. He'd heard tell of a boarding house somewhere along this stretch of trail, though he couldn't recall the name. Not that it mattered. Any roof would do on a night like this. By the time he reached the property, the storm had unleashed its full fury. Rain hammered down in blinding sheets, driven sideways by gusts of wind that threatened to tear the hat from his head. Lightning illuminated the scene in harsh, white flashes. A 2-story wooden structure with a small stable off to one side, sitting alone amidst the emptiness. A hand-painted sign swung violently from a post near the gate: Widow's Peak Boarding House. Blackwood dismounted with a grunt, his boots sinking into mud as he led Chance toward the stable. Before he reached it, the front door of the house swung open, spilling warm yellow light into the darkness. A figure emerged onto the covered porch, holding a lantern high. "Hello there, traveler," called a woman's voice, pitched to carry over the storm. "You're welcome to shelter here for the night." Blackwood raised a hand in acknowledgement and changed course, leading his horse toward the house instead. As he drew closer, he could make out the woman more clearly. Tall and solidly built, perhaps in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was broad and plain, but her smile seemed genuine enough. "Thank you kindly, ma'am," Blackwood said, stepping onto the porch and removing his sodden hat. "Didn't expect to find hospitality in these parts." "I'm Mabel Thornton," the woman said, looking him over with frank assessment. "This is my establishment. Been running it going on 15 years now." She gestured toward the stable. "Sarah will see to your horse. Sarah," she called over her shoulder. A young woman appeared in the doorway behind Mabel, slight of build, perhaps 20 years old, with mousy brown hair and downcast eyes. "Take the gentleman's horse to the stable, girl. Make sure he's properly dried and fed." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied softly, slipping past them to take Chance's reins from Blackwood. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed against his, and she didn't quite meet his gaze. "Don't mind Sarah," Mabel said, with a dismissive wave. "She's a bit simple, but she knows her way around horses." She stepped aside, gesturing for Blackwood to enter. Come in. You look half drowned. We've got stew on the stove and a fire in the hearth." Blackwood hesitated, watching as Sarah led his horse away. There was something in the girl's manner that gave him pause, a nervousness that seemed born of more than mere shyness. But the rain was coming down harder now, and his body ached for warmth and rest. "Much obliged," he said, stepping over the threshold. The interior of Widow's Peak was unexpectedly comfortable, even genteel. The front room was well appointed with sturdy frontier furniture and touches of Eastern refinement, a patterned rug from St. Louis, floral print curtains, a small upright piano in one corner. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a polished mahogany bar stood along another. The air was heavy with the smell of wood smoke, cooking meat, and something else, something sweet and faintly medicinal. "You can hang your things there," Mabel said, indicating a row of hooks beside the door. "Boots too, if you please. I keep a clean house." Indeed, Blackwood noticed, as he shrugged out of his duster. The place was immaculate. No dust on the surfaces, no mud tracked across the floor despite the remote location. It spoke of either constant traffic or obsessive care, yet the former seemed unlikely given the isolation. "You get many visitors out here, Mrs. Thornton?" he asked casually, unlacing his boots. "Mabel, please," she corrected him. "And enough to keep the doors open. Mostly cattle buyers, land surveyors, the occasional prospector." She eyed him curiously. "And what brings you to these parts, Mr. Blackwood? Daniel Blackwood." He straightened, setting his boots aside. "Just passing through, thought I might try my luck up north. Heard they're hiring hands for the spring cattle drive." It wasn't entirely a lie. The best deceptions Blackwood had found in his long career contained elements of truth. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, you're welcome to wait out the storm here." Mabel gestured toward the bar. "Can I offer you a drink? On the house. First one." "That's mighty generous," Blackwood said, following her. "Whiskey, if you have it." Mabel moved behind the bar with practiced ease, selecting a bottle and pouring a generous measure into a surprisingly clean glass. "You'll be wanting a room for the night, I expect. $1.50 includes dinner and breakfast." Blackwood nodded, reaching for his money pouch. As he counted out coins, he scanned the room with a casual glance. Something about the place nagged at him. It was too well maintained for such an isolated location, too refined. And Mabel herself seemed oddly eager, watching him with an intensity that belied her hospitable manner. "You run this place alone? Just you and the girl?" he asked, sliding the money across the bar. "Sarah's been with me 5 years now," Mabel said, tucking the coins away. "My husband built this place, but he's long gone, taken by fever back in '72. She pushed the whiskey toward him. "Drink up. You look like you could use it." Blackwood lifted the glass but didn't drink immediately. Instead, he sniffed it subtly, a habit born of caution. The whiskey smelled normal enough, cheap, but not poisoned. Still, he only pretended to sip, wetting his lips but keeping the liquid from his mouth. "Storm caught me by surprise," he said, setting the glass down. "Looks like it might last the night." "Oh, I'd count on it," Mabel replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "These spring storms can go on for days. But you're safe and dry now, and dinner will be ready shortly." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bar. "So tell me, Mr. Blackwood, what news from Cheyenne? It's been weeks since we've had visitors from that direction." Before Blackwood could answer, the front door burst open again, and Sarah stumbled in, soaked to the skin and breathless. Her wide eyes darted to Blackwood, then quickly away. "Horse is settled, ma'am," she reported. "Good girl. Now get changed before you catch your death," Mabel ordered. "Then come help with dinner." She turned back to Blackwood as Sarah disappeared through a door at the rear of the room. Poor thing would forget her own head if it wasn't attached. Now, where were we? Blackwood lifted his glass again in a pretend sip. "You were asking about Cheyenne." "Yes," Mabel smiled. "We get so little news out here." As she spoke, Blackwood felt the first stirrings of unease. Something in Sarah's expression had seemed almost like a warning. And now, as he looked more carefully around the room, he noticed other details. A man's pocket watch lying forgotten on a side table. A valise tucked half out of sight behind the piano. A fine leather belt coiled on a shelf that looked too small for Mabel's substantial frame. Items left behind by careless travelers, perhaps, or something else entirely. Not much to tell, he said carefully. Town's growing. Railroad bringing in new folks every day. Mabel nodded. But Blackwood could see a subtle disappointment in her eyes, as if she'd been hoping for more specific information. She straightened and moved out from behind the bar. "Let me show you to your room, Mr. Blackwood. You can wash up before dinner. We keep civilized hours here at Widow's Peak." As Blackwood followed her up a narrow staircase, he mentally checked the position of the Remington revolver holstered at the small of his back, hidden beneath his vest. 20 years as a U.S. Marshal had taught him to trust his instincts. And right now, those instincts were telling him that Widow's Peak boarding house was not what it seemed. And neither, of course, was he. The room Mabel showed him to was small but clean, containing a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, and a three-legged stool. A single window looked out over the rain-lashed yard, and a faded sampler on the wall offered the dubious comfort of a stitched Bible verse, "The Lord is my shepherd." "Towels there on the stand," Mabel said from the doorway. "Dinner in half an hour. Don't be late. Sarah's stew is best when it's hot." Blackwood nodded his thanks, and Mabel closed the door behind her. He waited until her footsteps receded down the hallway before moving to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see the stable where Sarah had taken chance. No light showed from within. Turning back to the room, Blackwood examined it with a careful eye. The bed seemed ordinary enough, though the mattress was surprisingly new. The washstand water was clean. He ran his fingers along the window frame and under the small bedside table, checking for loose boards or hidden compartments, but found nothing suspicious. Satisfied, he poured water into the basin and washed the trail dust from his face and hands. As he dried himself on the provided towel, he caught a familiar scent, something sweet and medicinal, similar to what he'd noticed downstairs. He brought the towel to his nose and inhaled deeply. There it was again, faint but unmistakable. Laudanum, or something similar. Blackwood's jaw tightened. It confirmed one of his suspicions: the Thornton woman might be drugging her guests. It was an old trick, one he'd encountered before in his years enforcing the law across the frontier. Remote establishments luring in travelers, drugging them, robbing them, sometimes killing them if they proved troublesome. Over the past year, reports had reached the marshal's office in Cheyenne of travelers disappearing along this stretch of trail. Lone men, mostly. The kind who wouldn't be immediately missed. Investigations had yielded little until 3 months ago, when a mail carrier reported seeing a man fitting the description of one of the missing being forcibly restrained at a remote homestead. By the time a deputy had ridden out to investigate, the place was abandoned. But there had been evidence, bloodstains, personal effects belonging to at least 2 of the missing men, and a letter referencing the operation at Widow's Peak. Blackwood had volunteered for the assignment himself. After 2 decades of service, he was meant to be riding a desk now, training younger men, but something about these disappearances had drawn him back into the field for one last investigation. Men like him, drifters, loners, being preyed upon by those who thought such men were disposable. He had a personal stake in proving otherwise. The rain drummed against the window as Blackwood carefully replaced the towel and checked his weapon. 6 rounds loaded, action clean. He tucked it back into its holster and adjusted his vest to cover it. Then he removed a small metal case from his boot, opening it to reveal a variety of small vials and packets, his own collection of powders and tinctures accumulated over years of undercover work. Selecting a vial of fine white powder, he tapped a small amount onto the back of his hand and inhaled it sharply. The bitter taste at the back of his throat made him grimace, but he knew it would serve its purpose. An old army surgeon had given him the formula years ago, a countermeasure to most common sedatives. It wouldn't prevent the effects entirely, but it would keep him conscious and functioning even if they tried to drug him heavily. A dinner bell rang from below, its cheerful tone incongruous with Blackwood's dark thoughts. He closed the metal case, returned it to his boot, and prepared himself for whatever game was being played at Widow's Peak. The dining room was a continuation of the surprising refinement Blackwood had noted earlier. A long oak table dominated the space, set with mismatched but quality china and actual silver flatware. A kerosene lamp with a painted glass shade cast a warm glow over the scene, and the windows were curtained against the night and the ongoing storm. Mabel stood at the head of the table, ladling stew into bowls, while Sarah moved silently around the room, placing bread and butter on the table. The girl kept her eyes down, but Blackwood caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. "Right on time, Mr. Blackwood," Mabel said with approval. "Have a seat. Hope you're hungry." "Smells mighty good," Blackwood said, taking a chair that allowed him to keep his back to the wall and his eyes on both women. "Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal." "Sarah has a real talent in the kitchen," Mabel said, setting a bowl before him. "Don't you, girl?" Sarah nodded without speaking, placing a plate of bread within Blackwood's reach. Her fingernails were bitten to the quick, he noticed, and there was a faint bruise at her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve. "Will anyone else be joining us?" Blackwood asked, noting the additional place settings. "Not tonight," Mabel replied smoothly. "I always keep the table ready, though. Never know when travelers might appear." She seated herself across from him. "Sarah, pour the coffee." The girl moved to comply, bringing a steaming pot to the table. As she poured, Blackwood noticed her hands trembling slightly, causing the dark liquid to splash. When she reached his cup, he covered it with his hand. "Thank you kindly, but coffee keeps me awake. Water will do fine." Something like relief flickered across Sarah's face. Mabel's expression, however, tightened momentarily before her smile returned. "Of course. Sarah, fetch water for Mr. Blackwood." As Sarah moved away, Mabel raised her own coffee cup. To save shelter on a stormy night, she toasted. Blackwood nodded, but didn't drink. Instead, he focused on the stew before him. It looked hearty enough, chunks of meat, potatoes, and carrots in a thick gravy. But again, that faint medicinal smell reached his nostrils. "This looks wonderful," he said, picking up his spoon. "What kind of meat, if you don't mind my asking?" "Venison," Mabel answered promptly. "Sarah's brother brings us game when he passes through." Blackwood noted the lie. Venison had a distinctive color, and this was clearly beef, but only nodded appreciatively. He pretended to take a spoonful, bringing it to his lips without actually consuming any, then set his spoon down as if savoring the taste. "Delicious," he pronounced. "Reminds me of my mother's cooking." Mabel beamed, seemingly pleased. "Eat up. There's plenty more." Sarah returned with a pitcher of water and filled his glass. As she leaned close, Blackwood heard her whisper, so softly he almost missed it. "Don't eat." Before he could react, she had moved away, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Her warning confirmed his suspicions, but raised new questions. Was Sarah a reluctant participant in whatever scheme was underway at Widow's Peak, or was this some more elaborate trap? The meal continued with Mabel dominating the conversation, asking questions about Blackwood's supposed travels and offering bits of local gossip that seemed designed to establish her legitimacy as a simple boarding house keeper. Blackwood played along, fabricating a background as a former ranch hand from Colorado who had drifted from job to job since the end of the war. All the while, he pretended to eat and drink, moving food around his plate and occasionally bringing the spoon to his mouth without consuming anything. It was a skill he had perfected in his years of undercover work, and Mabel seemed not to notice the deception. Sarah, however, watched him with growing confusion, clearly realizing he wasn't actually eating but uncertain what to make of it. "More stew, Mr. Blackwood?" Mabel offered after a time. Couldn't eat another bite, he declined, patting his stomach. Best meal I've had in months. Mabel smiled, apparently satisfied. Sarah, clear the dishes. Then bring Mr. Blackwood a proper drink. She turned to him. I insist. One of my late husband's traditions, a good whiskey after dinner. Blackwood knew refusing would seem suspicious. Well, if you insist, he conceded. As Sarah gathered the dishes, Blackwood caught her casting nervous glances toward the window. Following her gaze, he saw nothing but darkness and the continuing downpour. But something had clearly unsettled the girl. Mabel, too, seemed to be growing more tense as the evening wore on, checking the grandfather clock in the corner with increasing frequency. She was expecting someone, Blackwood realized, and given the remote location and the ongoing storm, that someone must be nearby. Sarah returned with a glass of amber liquid, which she placed before Blackwood with a hand that now shook visibly. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and he saw naked fear in them. Thank you, Sarah, Mabel said, a new edge in her voice. Now go check that all the doors are locked for the night. As Sarah moved to obey, Blackwood lifted the glass and pretended to sip. The whiskey smelled far stronger than what he'd been offered earlier, and beneath the alcohol, he detected that same medicinal odor, much more pronounced. Quite a kick to this one, he commented, setting the glass down. My husband's special reserve, Mabel said, watching him intently. I can believe that, Blackwood replied, feigning a slight slur, starting to feel it already. Mabel's smile widened, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Why don't you finish it, then head up to bed? Sounds like the storm might be letting up. You'll want to get an early start tomorrow. Blackwood nodded, making a show of draining the glass and then rising unsteadily to his feet. Think I will. Thank you for your hospitality, Mabel. My pleasure entirely, Mr. Blackwood. She remained seated, hands folded before her. Sleep well. Blackwood made his way up the stairs with deliberate heaviness, stumbling slightly on the top step for effect. Once in his room, he closed the door loudly, then moved silently to press his ear against it. After a moment, he heard Mabel's footsteps in the hallway below, followed by the murmur of voices, Mabel and Sarah, speaking too quietly for him to make out the words. Moving to the window, Blackwood peered out into the night. The rain had indeed slackened, and in the faint moonlight now breaking through the clouds, he could see the yard and stable more clearly. A movement caught his eye, a figure emerging from the stable, then quickly ducking back inside as a lantern light appeared at the boarding-house door. Mabel stepped outside, holding the lantern high and looking toward the stable. After a moment, a man emerged and hurried toward her. They spoke briefly, then both went inside, closing the door behind them. Blackwood's jaw tightened. The pieces were falling into place. This was no simple drugging and robbery operation. There were others involved, using Widow's Peak as a base for something more organized. He moved away from the window and checked his revolver again, then positioned himself beside the door, listening intently. The countermeasure he had taken would keep him alert for hours yet, regardless of what they had tried to dose him with. Now it was a matter of waiting, gathering information, and choosing the right moment to act. The voices from below grew louder. Mabel's, Sarah's, and now a man's, deep and impatient. Blackwood couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested an argument. Then footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. Blackwood pressed himself against the wall beside the door, revolver ready. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside his room. The door swung open, and a lantern light spilled into the room, illuminating the empty bed. A large figure stepped across the threshold, a man in a rain-slicked duster hat pulled low over his face. "He's not," the man began, then grunted in shock as Blackwood pressed the barrel of his revolver against the base of his skull. "Don't move," Blackwood ordered quietly. "And don't call out unless you want to be wearing your brains on the outside." The man froze, his hand dropping away from the gun at his hip. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered harshly. "Someone who asks the questions," Blackwood replied. "Now, slowly, use 2 fingers to remove your weapon and drop it on the floor." The man complied, extracting a Colt revolver from his holster and letting it fall with a thud. "Kick it away," Blackwood instructed, and the man obeyed, sending the weapon skittering under the bed. "Good. Now, how many more of you are there?" Before the man could answer, a woman's scream echoed from below, followed by a crash. Sarah's voice, Blackwood realized. The man before him tensed, preparing to move. "Don't even think about it," Blackwood warned, pressing the revolver harder against the man's neck. "Answer me. How many?" "3 more, downstairs," the man gritted out. "But you're making a mistake. You don't understand what's happening here." Another scream from below, cut short this time. Blackwood had to make a decision. Keeping the gun pressed to the man's head, he reached around with his free hand and removed a pair of handcuffs from his coat pocket. "U.S. Marshal," he said, the words carrying the weight of 2 decades of authority. "You're under arrest." The man's shoulders sagged slightly.
"Marshal?"
"Thank Christ. I'm Agent Taylor, Pinkerton Detective Agency. I've been working undercover here for 2 weeks. Blackwood hesitated, then pressed the handcuffs into the man's hand. "Prove it." Taylor slowly reached into his inside coat pocket and extracted a folded document, which he handed back to Blackwood. In the dim light, Blackwood could make out the Pinkerton Agency letterhead and the man's credentials. "Hired by the Union Pacific Railroad," Taylor explained quietly. "Too many of their payroll shipments have gone missing along this route. We traced the robberies back to a gang operating out of this location." Another crash from below, followed by a man's angry shout. Taylor tensed again. "That's Sarah," he said urgently. "She's my contact. Been feeding me information about the operation. If they've discovered she's working with me..." Blackwood made his decision, lowering his weapon. "How many hostiles?" "3 men plus the Thornton woman," Taylor replied, retrieving his Colt from under the bed. "They're expecting another gang member with a payroll shipment stolen this morning. That's why they drugged you. They clear out all witnesses before dividing the take." "And Sarah?" "Mabel's niece. Been kept here against her will. Forced to help with the operation. I promised to get her out." Taylor checked his weapon. "We need to move now." Mabel's right-hand man, Curtis, has been suspicious of Sarah for days. If he's hurting her..." Blackwood nodded grimly. "Lead the way." But Taylor, he caught the Pinkerton man's arm. "I've been tracking disappearances along this route for months. Men who were never robbed because they never made it back to civilization. This is more than just a robbery operation." Taylor's expression darkened. "I know, there's a cellar. I haven't been able to get into it, but..." He didn't finish the sentence. Another cry from below spurred them into action. They moved into the hallway, Taylor in the lead, Blackwood following close behind. At the top of the stairs, Taylor paused, signaling for silence. Below, they could hear Mabel's voice, calm but with an undercurrent of fury. "You stupid girl. After everything I've done for you, did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Sarah's response was too quiet to hear, but it was followed by the sharp sound of a slap and a pained gasp. A man's voice, rough and angry. "Just tell us who you've been talking to, and this can stop." Taylor glanced back at Blackwood, his expression grim. Blackwood nodded, and they began their descent, moving as quietly as possible down the creaking stairs. The scene that greeted them in the front room confirmed Blackwood's worst suspicions. Sarah was tied to a chair, her face already showing a darkening bruise. Mabel stood before her, all pretense of motherly concern gone, her expression cold and calculating. 2 men flanked the girl's chair, one lean and rat-faced, the other a hulking brute with massive hands and a face like carved stone. A 3rd man stood by the window, peering out into the night, a shotgun cradled in his arms. None of them had noticed the two figures on the stairs yet. "Last chance, Sarah," Mabel was saying, leaning close to the girl's face. "Who have you been passing information to? Is it the marshal's office? The railroad?" Sarah lifted her chin, a surprising defiance in her tear-streaked face. "I'm not telling you anything, Aunt Mabel. Not anymore." Mabel straightened, her mouth a thin line of displeasure. "Curtis," she said to the rat-faced man, "make her talk, but don't damage her too badly. We can still use her when this is over." Curtis grinned, drawing a knife from his belt. "My pleasure, Mrs. Thornton." That was all Blackwood needed to hear. He raised his revolver and fired a single shot, striking the lamp on the table and plunging the room into darkness. Beside him, Taylor was already moving, leaping the last few stairs to tackle the man with the shotgun. Chaos erupted. The big man bellowed in surprise and anger, blindly charging toward the stairs. Blackwood sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him past, then brought the butt of his revolver down hard on the back of the man's head. The brute stumbled but didn't fall, turning with surprising speed to grab Blackwood's coat. Across the room, Taylor was grappling with the shotgun wielder, their struggle illuminated by flashes of lightning through the windows. Curtis had released Sarah and was now moving toward the commotion, knife gleaming in his hand. Mabel, meanwhile, had vanished. Blackwood twisted in the big man's grip, bringing his knee up hard into the man's groin. The brute's grip loosened just enough for Blackwood to break free and deliver a solid punch to his jaw. This time, the man went down. "Taylor," Blackwood called, turning to help the Pinkerton man. But Taylor had already subdued his opponent, using the shotgun as a club to render the man unconscious. Now he was facing off against Curtis, whose knife slashed dangerously through the air between them. "Get Sarah," Taylor shouted, dodging another knife thrust. Blackwood moved toward the girl, still tied to the chair, but stopped short as a revolver cocked behind him. "That's far enough, Marshal," Mabel's voice said coldly. Blackwood froze, then slowly turned to find Mabel emerging from a side room, a small derringer pointed steadily at his chest. "You disappoint me," she said, her earlier affable manner completely gone. "I thought you'd be sleeping like a baby by now. Instead, you've ruined months of careful work." "It's over, Mabel," Blackwood said evenly. "Put down the gun." Mabel's laugh was brittle. "Over? Do you have any idea what you're dealing with? This isn't some small-time operation. We have connections all the way to Cheyenne, to the governor's office itself." "Maybe so," Blackwood acknowledged. "But right now it's just you and that little pop gun against a U.S. Marshal. Those aren't odds I'd take." Mabel's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps not. But what about these odds?" The front door burst open and a fourth man entered, rain dripping from his slicker. He took in the scene with a quick glance, then raised a rifle, pointing it not at Blackwood but at Sarah. "One move," Mabel said smugly, and Clyde puts a bullet through the girl's head. The room fell still. The only sounds the ragged breathing of the combatants and a diminishing patter of rain on the roof. Taylor stood frozen, Curtis's knife now at his throat. Blackwood remained motionless, his revolver half raised. "Drop your weapons," Mabel ordered. "Both of you." Taylor looked at Blackwood, a silent question in his eyes. Blackwood gave an imperceptible nod. Both men slowly placed their weapons on the floor. "That's better," Mabel said. "Curtis, tie them up. Clyde, check on Bert and Jasper." She gestured toward the unconscious men. As Curtis moved to comply, pushing Taylor roughly toward a chair, Blackwood caught sight of Sarah. The girl had managed to work one hand free from her bonds and was now reaching for something hidden beneath the seat of her chair. "You're making a mistake, Mabel," Blackwood said loudly, drawing attention to himself. "Your operation is blown. We're not the only ones who know about Widow's Peak." Mabel's smile was cold. "Is that so? And who else knows?" "Your superiors back in Cheyenne. The ones who've been taking our money for years to look the other way. She shook her head. No, Marshall. No one's coming to save you. That what you told the others? Blackwood asked, his voice hardening. The men who disappeared along this trail, the ones buried somewhere on your property. A flicker of surprise crossed Mabel's face. You know about that. I know everything, Blackwood bluffed. Every name, every grave. Curtis had finished binding Taylor to a chair and now moved toward Blackwood, rope in hand. Behind him, Sarah had extracted a small revolver from beneath her chair and was now aiming it with trembling hands. Enough talk, Mabel snapped. Tie him up, Curtis. When we're done here, you and Clyde can take them out to join the others. 2 more holes in the cellar floor won't make much difference. Curtis grabbed Blackwood's arm, twisting it painfully behind his back. As he did, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the house, momentarily drowning out all other sounds. In that instant, Sarah fired. The bullet caught Clyde in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle clattering to the floor. Mabel whirled in shock, her derringer discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. Blackwood seized the opportunity, driving his elbow hard into Curtis's solar plexus, then following with a headbutt that sent the man staggering backward. Taylor, despite his bonds, managed to tip his chair over. Rolling toward the dropped shotgun, Blackwood lunged for his own revolver, coming up with it just as Mabel recovered and aimed her derringer at him once more. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Mabel's bullet grazed Blackwood's arm, tearing through his sleeve. Blackwood's shot struck more true, hitting Mabel square in the chest. She stumbled backward, disbelief crossing her face before she collapsed to the floor. Curtis recovered quickly, drawing a hidden pistol from his boot. Before he could aim, Taylor, who had freed one hand, swung the shotgun like a club, catching Curtis across the temple. The man dropped like a stone. Clyde, wounded but still dangerous, scrambled for his fallen rifle. Sarah fired again, her hands steadier now. The bullet caught him in the leg, and he howled in pain, clutching at the wound. Don't move, Blackwood ordered, training his revolver on the injured man. It's over. In the sudden quiet, the only sounds were harsh breathing and the fading rumble of thunder. Dawn broke clear and cold over Widow's Peak. Outside, 3 bodies lay covered with canvas, awaiting transport to Cheyenne. Inside, Blackwood sat at the dining table, binding his wounded arm, while Taylor secured the surviving gang member, Curtis, to a chair. Sarah poured coffee, her hands still trembling slightly but her eyes clearer now, unburdened by fear. Been working with the Pinkertons for 6 months, she explained, setting a cup before Blackwood. After my parents died, Aunt Mabel took me in. Didn't know what she was involved in until it was too late. She glanced toward the locked cellar door. By then, I'd seen too much. How many? Blackwood asked quietly. 12 that I know of, Sarah replied, her voice hollow. Travelers, mostly, men who wouldn't be missed. Taylor joined them, pouring himself coffee. Railroad payroll robberies funded the operation, but that was just the beginning. They had plans to expand, using this place as a base for controlling the whole territory. You mentioned connections in Cheyenne? Blackwood prompted. Taylor nodded grimly. Judge Reynolds, for one. Maybe higher. Blackwood's weathered face showed no surprise. Been suspecting that for a while, never had proof. You'll find it in Mabel's office, Sarah said. Ledgers, letters, she kept records of everything. Names, dates, payments. Evidence enough to hang a dozen men, Taylor added. Blackwood sipped his coffee, wincing at the pain in his arm. Good work, both of you. When we get back to Cheyenne, a horse's whinny from outside interrupted him. Taylor moved to the window, then relaxed. It's my partner, right on time. The door opened, and a well-dressed man entered, surveying the scene with professional detachment. Director Campbell, Taylor acknowledged. This is Marshall Blackwood, and Sarah Harper, our inside agent. Campbell nodded to them both. The agency owes you a debt of gratitude, Miss Harper, as does the railroad. He placed a leather folio on the table. Your new identity papers, as promised, and passage to San Francisco. Sarah accepted the folio with trembling hands. Thank you, sir. What about the Cheyenne connection? Blackwood asked. Campbell's expression darkened. We have men positioned throughout the territory. When you arrive with the evidence, they'll move simultaneously. By this time tomorrow, Judge Reynolds and his associates will be in custody. Blackwood nodded, satisfied. He'd spent 20 years chasing outlaws across the frontier. But this was the case that would define his career. Not just bringing down criminals, but the corrupt officials who protected them. Outside, more horses approached, the marshal's deputies from Cheyenne, summoned by Campbell. We should move soon, Taylor said, gathering his gear. Storm's cleared, but the trail will be muddy. Sarah gazed around the boarding house one last time. I never thought I'd leave this place, she murmured. What will you do in San Francisco? Blackwood asked. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Start over. Something quiet. A bookshop, maybe. You'd make a fine Pinkerton agent, Taylor suggested, not quite meeting her eyes. Sarah considered this, then shook her head. I've seen enough violence for one lifetime. She touched Taylor's arm briefly. But thank you for believing me when no one else would. Campbell cleared his throat. The wagon's ready for the prisoners and he hesitated, the remains. Blackwood rose, settling his hat on his head. 20 years of service, and finally, justice for men whose disappearances had been ignored because they were drifters. Nobodies. Men like him, but for the badge he carried. Let's finish this, he said. Outside, the storm had washed the world clean. The vast Wyoming sky stretched blue and limitless above them, and the distant mountains stood sharp against the horizon. A new day, with old wrongs made right. As they rode away from Widow's Peak, Marshall, Pinkerton agents, deputies, and one young woman bound for a new life, Blackwood looked back once at the boarding house standing isolated against the landscape. In a few years, it would be just another abandoned homestead, its dark history fading into frontier legend. But the justice delivered there would endure, and for Daniel Blackwood, U.S. Marshal, that was enough.